good to see so many people that I know. I've forgotten who all I did and who I didn't.
Four-digit
So,
password.
excuse me if I didn't recognize you right off the bat. You know, I had 39 years working for a bunch of railroads, starting with the New York Central, New Haven, and Northwestern, Central Vermont, and then we moved to Indiana, where we live now, and I ran a group of short line railroads there. You know, but my favorite of all places really was the Chicago Northwestern. And, you know, of that, working on the Wisconsin division was my favorite, because I was here for 8 years, which for us was a long time. So I'm glad you all came, and I appreciate the fact that you did. How many of you, just for the hell of it, how many of you read my series in the classic things? Well, tear up my speech. You know, when Rob suggested that we do this, he said, you know, you had an interesting career, and, you know, it's a story that not many people get to hear from the management side. And not being a writer by profession anyhow, I said, do I really want to do this? But I thought about it really from the family, you know, ancestry type thing, that this is, given how important the railroad was in our lives. And I tell our 2 daughters, you know, that neither of them would have met their husbands and met them in the Chicago Northwestern. Oh, okay. How's that? I'm sorry. So we did it. And, you know, it started off with 2 pages in the initial version of the article, and grew to 8 at the end. And I got comfortable doing it, and I met a lot of people through it, and you know, I'm glad you all did too. So I imagine you all know the story of the 1385, and you know, it started off in 1982. Started off in 1981, actually. You know, and there were actually 2 people, you know, maybe 3, that sort of set the wheels in motion. And the background being, you know, that Chicago Northwestern, first of all, was a great place to work. I think it was well managed, and we did most things right. Not everything, but most. But one of the things we didn't really do a good job was, nor did the industry, was promoting itself and getting the public to relate to it. And of course, I'd grown up around steam on the New Haven, and you know, followed it, and I knew what it could do in terms of public relations. And my secretary at Butler was Sue Gensler, and Sue had worked for a public relations company before coming to work for the railroad. And she had a lot of contacts, and she was one of many people who said, why don't we do more? Why don't the railroads do more to promote themselves? And, you know, if you remember how things were back then, you know, it was pretty tough. And public relations wasn't at the top of the list of where you could put your hard-earned money. Track and other things took precedence. So then I had a meeting one day with Jack Schweiger. Jack was the LSRHA inspector who was in charge of the Wisconsin territory. And we'd meet from time to time and talk about what he thought and what I thought. And at the end of one of those meetings, he said, you know, there's a rumor floating around that you'd like to do something, you know, with that steam locomotive up at North Continent, Mid-Continent. And I said, well, yeah. He said, well, if you do, you know, I said, I'll do what I can with the LSRHA to smooth the way for you. So that was important. And then I was down in Jim Zito's office. Jim was the VP operations of the Northwestern. And I knew that his father had been a Chicago division, Chicago engineer. And there were also rumors floating around that he was a regular attendee on the CB&Q's steam trips. So I kind of thought, you know, this guy might be a kindred spirit. So we had a meeting to talk about a safety program that I wanted to start on the Wisconsin division. And there was a picture in his office on the wall of a Chicago Northwestern steam locomotive with a bunch of railroaders posed in front of it. And I asked him about the picture, and it turned out it was his father's locomotive engineer training program class. So that kind of opened the door, and I told him what my thoughts were on getting a steam program or something going. And he said, well, you know, see what you can do. And he said, but it can't cost any money Nothing to do with volunteers. Because he knew, he was close with Jerry Davis, who was the president of the VP of the Union Pacific, and UP at that time was doing their thing with the Challenger. And the rumor, at least what the public word was, that they were doing it with volunteers. So he said, you can find volunteers to do that. I said, sure I can. So he said, why don't you go to Mexico? He said, I think there's an H down there someplace in Mexico. The H is for the Northwestern 484, monster. Well, I knew damn well there wasn't, but also knew that the Mid-Continent had the 1385, which made sense, from a lot of standpoints. It was small enough to go any place you wanted, it was pretty simple, wasn't a lot of appliances on it to go wrong, and big enough to impress, so that led to discussions with Mid-Continent, and they saw a benefit to them from doing it, and we did from the Northwestern, and we didn't do it for free. We wound up putting about $50,000 into it to do the work. After the FRA came and inspected it, and I don't know if you remember or not, but one of the things that I wrote, I think the title of the Classic Trains article was The Little Charmer. So the FRA guys showed up, there were 5 of them, I think, at Mid-Continent to look the engine over and see what needed to be done, if anything, to prepare to go out on the railroad. So I went up and met them, and the guys came in, and the leader of the band looked at the engine. He said, a little charmer, isn't she? I said, yeah. So I was pretty sure right then that, that we'd be okay with the FRA, which we were, but they did require, a certain amount of work needed to be done. Just for the initial trip, which was the Prosperity Special, the Wisconsin Division, starting at Green Bay on National Transportation Week in 1982 and winding up a week or 2 later right here at Mid-Continent. So we did that work, but they said if you decide to do anything else, which we ultimately did, he said here's another list that you need to do for that. So anyhow, let's get going with the pictures here, and I need somebody to light up this keyboard here.
So they can went to sleep.
Okay, there we go. Okay. Is it here?
Hold on.
Oh,
There you go.
there we go.
There we go.
All right. Okay. Most of what I'm going to talk, I got 52 pictures here to show you, and I have no idea how long it's going to take. I never know what I'm going to say until I say it. Anyhow, this is a picture that was taken at Wyville. I just put it here as kind of the opening picture. It was in 1983 on the way from Mid-Continent to Iowa through Waseca. And this picture here was doctored up quite a bit in Photoshop to make it a little more dramatic. But just getting underway, we'd come up the line to the right here is the Omaha down towards LSRHA. To the left is to Altoona, behind me is to Wyville, to Winona, Tunnel City, and the locomotive is coming off the line from Adams. I got a friend who's a Photoshop expert, much more so than I am, although I spent the last 2 years surviving the COVID goings on, scanning 50-some years worth of slides. The scanning part of it isn't much fun, and picking the pictures out you're going to scan is even harder, but editing them is a lot of fun. I really enjoy it, and I enjoy editing them and fooling around with it almost as much as I did taking the picture. But yeah, there we go. All right, I took this picture at North Freedom. We're leaving North Freedom on Palm Sunday. 1982.
Is that black and white, or is that just?
That was a color slide that was scanned and converted to black and white.
Oh.
And
Beautiful.
so from left to right, that's Carl Ulrich, passed away last year. And then Dick Franks, who was a Wisconsin Division locomotive engineer in Milwaukee, who had been hired out in the steam era, and he worked under Gary Selk to sort of manage the program on our end of it. And then Skip Lichter with the stocking cap, and also passed away. He and Carl passed away within 12 days of each other. last year. And then Tom O'Brien, who was sort of the leader of the band at Mid-Continent for that. But I think Carl and Skip, the people that I think of at Mid-Continent, who really kept the 1385 percolating to where we were in good enough shape that I was comfortable, because I kind of had my career on the line with this thing. But I felt comfortable, you know, that we could make it work, and they could, and that they had the machine in good enough shape that it wasn't going to, you know, cause us big problems, which it never ever did. And Rick Peters was another who's not in this picture, nor is Gary Selk. But I wanted to run the engine on its first leg out of Mid-Continent, which I did. I ran it up as far as LSRHA. And so I wasn't one of the lucky people who were there at Rock Springs getting all those great pictures that you see the thing at Rock Springs. Sometimes I wish I did. But anyhow, that was the first leg of the trip out of Mid-Continent. Went from Mid-Continent to Butler the first day, and then from Butler to Green Bay the second day. This is a picture at Mirabel on the way up to Green Bay. One of the things that I like to do with my photography is make them as dramatic and as artistic as I can. And, you know, not to get really into the weeds photography-wise, but, you know, if you just take the picture as it comes out of the camera, particularly of a train, you know, big, black, dark, you know, in the sky, you get a wide range of light, and the camera film doesn't really do a good job of that. So, but it's there if you can bring it out. So that's kind of what I do. And there's a bunch of programs that do it. You can do it in Photoshop. I do it in an outfit called Nick. They have a product called Detail Extractor, and it sucks detail out of that picture like you wouldn't believe. So this is at Mirabel, anyhow, on the way to Green Bay. This is in the shop at Green Bay. The guy in the blue is Al Kowalik, who was, I had always pictured Al as an employee with an attitude, grumpy, grouchy, didn't like management, but he was a big-time rail fan. I didn't realize that because I went to Green Bay, and my, you know, the job was I had to find volunteers to do all this. And Green Bay was a shop where we actually worked on steam right up until the end, so that was like in the mid-50s. And a lot of the guys there worked on steam, and we got them all together one day and said, look, this is what we wanted to do, how many volunteers do we have? And we wound up with like 17. More volunteers really than we could actually use. And Al was the foreman, and he was the leader of the band, and he loved that locomotive. And he was interviewed by the Green Bay Press Gazette during the process about what he thought about it, what his feelings were, and he said, you know, he said, I sat on that bench because we had to get the locomotive over a pit, which is the reason why I went up there. Mid-Continent didn't have a pit. And he said, I just sat there and looked at that thing, and he said, 40 years of railroading came back. And yeah, that was one of the things I wanted to do. You know, I mean, there was the public, you had all kinds of audiences, right? You had the public, you had your employees, you had the press, you had the government, and trying to arrange the program around giving all those people the exposure to the railroad and what we had done and why we weren't bankrupt like the Milwaukee Road was, because that was people in Milwaukee, people in Wisconsin, they talk about railroads, they thought about the Milwaukee Road. So anyhow, that was Al. This was a picture taken at a place called Little Swamico. When the work was done, we had to take the locomotive out on the road for kind of a break-in trip, and we put it on the way freight that ran from Wisconsin, from Green Bay up to Oconto and back, the Oconto way freight. And so it was 1385 and a diesel and a couple of business cars and I don't know, a tool car. And we were going to stop every 20-some miles or so to check everything, make sure everything was running cool and look the engine over. So the first place we stopped, and it wasn't planning, and I was playing engineer on that trip too. We stopped in front of this little schoolhouse at Little Swamico. Yeah, we'd only been there a couple of minutes, and all the kids came out with their teachers and stood there and looked and looked. And that was great. And so that gave us the idea, you know, of working with school districts as we traveled around the system to, you know, if you aren't going to stop there, you know, for a big weekend-long event, you stop and let the kids look and see what it was all about. And went the wrong way. And that led to scenes like that. That's at Wanakee. And didn't know there were that many school kids in Wanakee, did you? And this is at Wanakee also. We're handing out Operation Lifesaver literature to the kids. This guy here, the guy with the polka dot hat, and the guy with the striped shirt were the conductor and the brakeman. Can't think of their names right now, but the guy in the striped shirt was Al. He was the local union rep. And but it worked out well. We had a lot of, you know, neat experiences that way. We got to Oconto and we had to Y the 1385 to go back to Green Bay. And I've written about this story a couple of times, so I won't go into a lot of detail, but the plan was to be at Oconto, and when the Ed Burkhardt was on his inspection trip, Northwestern had, in the spring and the fall, we did inspection trips over the railroad with either the president or the VPO or the VP of Transportation, which was Burkhardt. So he was coming down, this was his train with the F7, and we had him lined up that when they got close to Oconto, they had in with their radio the business car and said, hey, he said, we're having problems up here, our alarm bells are ringing on the locomotives, and we're not sure, you know, we can make it to Green Bay. And I came on the radio and said, well, we're here with the relief engine, you need it. So here they are, they're pulling into Oconto with the stick diesels. 1385 has been turned on the Y. 1385 was supposed to be able to negotiate a 19-degree curve, and the Y at Oconto Falls was 19 degrees, so we crept around that. So here they are coming, and here they are going. There's the diesels in the background, and here they are leaving with the 1385 heading for Green Bay with Burkhardt at the throttle. And he stayed there until they got into a rainstorm.
Did he have seniority over you, Chris?
He did. Rank, if not seniority. Yeah, he still talks about that today. That was one of the highlights of his career. So in Green Bay, this was the beginning of National Transportation Week, with the second weekend in May every year. And there was also correspondent with the Northwestern Historical Society's annual meeting, which was in Green Bay. So we had an open house lined up for the public with equipment on display, and each of the departments kind of showed what they did. You know, the track department had a tamper, and they ran up and down the track with their tamper. And we had the only Class 4 yard drag on the system, and the mechanical department had their boom truck there, and they raised and lowered, and it was neat. And they gave them a chance to show their families what they did in the public. And we also invited the other two railroads in Green Bay to participate with the locomotives. So that's the Green Bay and Western, and the Milwaukee Road locomotive was, and there's the 1385.
Out of Uncles.
Yep. Yeah, the Milwaukee Road didn't have one hand yet. Yeah. And this is another show of the open house, and it shows the steps that we had so folks could tour the cab. You know, that was always a big deal, and the lineup of people. But I got a box full of letters, you know, that I got over the years from different people, including a bunch of employees who were either a guest on the business car or had their families around and all that. And we had a local chairman there in Green Bay for the UTU who was really difficult to deal with. But I got the nicest letter from him after this, you know, thanking us for giving him the opportunity to show his family what he did for them. Excuse me. So here we are, 1385. This is the Prosperity Special now, on the way from Green Bay to Milwaukee. And we had customers on our business car at on the rear end of the train. And we had one group that rode from Green Bay to Manitowoc, another group that rode from Manitowoc to Sheboygan, and a third group that ran from Sheboygan to to Milwaukee. And each of them included a photo run-by along the way, this wasn't a photo run-by, but we stopped at the depot at Manitowoc. This is our first stop. And it goes to show, that Sue Gensler did a good job of, getting the publicity for what we were doing, because this is the crowd that showed up to see us. We were only there about 15, 20 minutes. But this is the depot at Manitowoc, and this is the photo run-by on that leg of the trip in Cleveland, Ohio. And you can see the makeup of the train. It was one of each of the types of freight cars, that we had, that we either built or rebuilt or, whatever. Boxcar, covered hopper, gone, a flat, and a piggyback car, and then a caboose, and then the two business cars for the guests. And so we got to Milwaukee, and the next deal on the agenda for the Prosperity Special was the press run. We ran from Butler to St. Francis and back. And so we had people there from all the different radio stations, TV, the newspapers. And one guy showed up with a suitcase. And I asked him, I said, when we had mentioned Belton somehow or other in the invitation, we talked about going from Butler to St. Francis with a photo run by at Belton. Belton is where the line to Madison branches off from the main line. And this guy said, well, he said, I saw Belton, and I looked on the map, and I couldn't find Belton, so I figured it was going to be a long trip. So he had packed a suitcase. But it was a little history lesson on the railroad, because there was all kinds of railroad names, that wouldn't show up in the public map. But the other thing that we did, and this was really a factor in the ongoing program, was on the leg from Madison on the way back to North Freedom, we invited selected people from headquarters to ride with us in a business car. And it was the head of all the different departments, the vice presidents and all that. And so we had two business cars full of, Northwestern top brass. But, the almost unanimous comments that I got from them was, we really didn't expect, the kind of a turnout that we saw, with this. And, good job, you showed us something. But this is, I heard somebody say, this is Crystal Lake, which it is. And we had pulled the train up, and then we cut the cars off back this side of the crossing and run the locomotive up by the depot. And so they cut the train back together here and getting ready to go. But you saw when it came time afterwards at the Prosperity Special was done now, and what do we do next? And we decided to make it an ongoing program, which it was for at least 4 years. And having all those people on the train and seeing the public reaction was part of it. This is in Madison. That's one of the stops overnight with the Prosperity Special. Local TV station came out. The guy with the chrome cap is Al Blood, who was an engineer, maybe a fireman, but he was interviewed. And I think from an employee morale standpoint, I think there was a lot of, they were happy to see the interest that people had in what they did. And so we kind of picked who they talked to, but nevertheless, that's the stop on the way. And, wrong way, sorry about that. That's another, one of our key groups is the kids. And so this is Lodi. We stopped in Lodi for, one of our periodic checker out things. And so the guys were up in the cab and they were sweeping out the floor, and they swept a couple of lumps of coal out, and these kids were on the cab and they ran and scrambled for the coal. So they swept some more coal down. So I don't know what their parents said when they got home. I love that picture. Part of the deal was with Mid-Continent was that we would run an excursion one a year someplace, from Mid-Continent on the Madison sub, probably the Devil's Lake and back, you know, to sell tickets for them, fundraiser for them. So in 1982, if you get time to do that, and lo and behold, to my great surprise, they decided they wanted to use the Montana Western gas electric car instead of the 1385, which they did. They ran, I don't know how many trips back and forth. But this was the last trip of the day, and I was on my way home in my car on the ferry boat, and lo and behold, you know, here come the train. So I got on my radio and said, "Hey, stop in the middle of the bridge so I can get it." So they did, and that's the picture, and I love it.
Right.
Boone, Iowa had an annual railroad oriented, it was a big railroad town, and they had an annual event called Puffer Belly Days. And so George Mabey, who was the division manager out there, asked if we could get 1385 to go out there and run excursions for them from Boone over the Kate Shelley Bridge and back, which we did after getting permission from the FRA to do a little extension of the original thing. And so this is on the way from Chicago to Iowa. This is in DeKalb. Most of you know the location, I'm sure. It doesn't look much like that today. The signals are gone. Colding Dock is still there. And it's another one of my favorite pictures, really. Two cars of coal. One of the other gondolas had the steps that we looked around with us to get access to the cab. I love this picture too. This is in Manly, Iowa. This is on the way to Boone on our, not on 1982, but on a subsequent trip. But I don't know if those guys were farmers or railroaders. I suspect they were farmers, but I don't know. I didn't talk to them. But I took the picture and I just, you know, I just think about those guys. When they started farming, they were probably doing it on a steam-powered tractor. And so, you know, another, you know, good memories type thing.
Earl.
Well, one of the really sad things about the transition from steam to diesel was the way enginemen came to work dressed. And so meet Curly Austin. Curly was an engineer in the Iowa division, and each division or seniority district or whatever had their own way of handling special trains. You know, most of them just took somebody out there because of the crew. We had to have an engineer pilot on the train and a train crew. And most of the places we went, there was somebody off the extra board or the pool whose turn it was. But on the Iowa, the guy got to pick, and he was a senior engineer, and he got to pick, and he was our engineer from Clinton to Boone, and beyond, I guess, although I'm not sure. But anyhow, that's how engineers dressed back in the days when they had to dress that way. And you'd be surprised how many people we saw who came, the wives of of railroaders, daughters, sons, whatever, who came with a picture of their dad or grandpa or whatever, you know, dressed like this. And it was really, really kind of neat.
Yeah.
I used to stop at the Cromer Cap Company place, which was in Columbus, I think, whenever I'd be driving from Milwaukee to Adams or to North Freedom, and talk to those folks. And I actually had talked into it one time. They're making a Cromer cap with the Chicago and Northwestern logo on as part of the decor. And I came back and I took it to a safety meeting of our division safety committee and said, here's your choice. You know, we're going to make some caps, safety award caps. We can either do a baseball cap, you know, which everybody did, or I can get a Cromer cap, you know, with the Northwestern logo. And to my disappointment, they decided to go with the baseball cap. But anyhow, that's that. Here's another picture, better lucky than good. This is, well, you know where it is. It's in Mason City. And we had stopped there on the way down the spine line. This was in 1983. We had gone from Butler to Adams to Waseca to down the spine line. And so we're leaving in Manly, or in Mason City. Jeff Cook, who was the division manager of the Iowa division at the time, or the Central Division, he said, how about driving my car down to, I forgot where the next stop was going to be, but it doesn't matter. He said, I'd like to ride the train. He had his wife with him. So I said, sure. So we're leaving town, and we drive down, you go past the interchange track here between the Northwestern and the Iowa Traction. And the Iowa Traction crew was there, and they were getting ready to leave, and I flagged them down, and I said, hey, would you mind hanging around for about 10 minutes? And he said, you'll see a steam engine go by. And so they did, and I got this picture. I was the only person there, it wasn't staged, and so better lucky than good. And that's, that's not one of the trips there. The Puffer Belly Days thing was a 1385 on the west end, the suburban cars, a business car or two on the rear end, and then a diesel going the other way. So, but anyhow, this was when they had finished up the Puffer Belly Days and were on the way west to Council Bluffs ultimately, and the same train of makeup that you saw back in at DeKalb. But it's one of the few pictures. Usually, you take a picture of a train on a bridge. You know, the train is kind of, it's in the picture there, but you can't hardly see it because the bridge is so massive. But this one here is a little bit different. So now we're back. The 1982 stuff is done, and we have decided to make this an ongoing program. And the program would be, that we would contact communities along the railroad, come up with sort of an overall itinerary route that we're going to go, contact communities with the offer that we would run the train for them, we'd ride the train, they would sell the tickets, they would pay us a nominal expense to cover them. Because remember, the deal with the Zito was, it can't cost any money. So, but anyhow, so we came up with the plan that we'd come up with an itinerary every year, and include as many communities or whatever as we could into it. Make some stops along the way for kids to look, and that's all we did for 4 years. But now we had to go in and do some work that the FRA had said you got to do to make an extended operation out of it. And the place that came up to do it was the Milwaukee Boiler Company. Got a call one day from Dick Stevens, who was the president of the Milwaukee Boiler Company. He said, hey, we got a bunch of guys here would love to work on that engine. He says, I'll give you a price that you can't refuse, and we can handle it. So we took the engine down, took it to Green Bay, stripped it, pulled it down to Milwaukee, put it in the shop, which is where it is here, and they did a whole bunch of jobs with it. The thing that I remember was that one of them was there was a crack in the boiler. It was in the saddle under where the boiler sits on top of the frame. And the guys said, the Milwaukee boiler, no problem, we can weld it. We weld on 3,000 pounds per square inch, boilers in our business. So they did. And so then along comes the FRA, and the FRA breaks out their steam locomotive manual dated 1913 or something like that.
Right.
And they said, hey, you can't do that. You got to patch it. So he said, oh, okay. So we put a patch over the weld, and life was good. But it was probably the strongest portion of the boiler in America. Here's a neat picture. This is outside the shop in Green Bay, and this was actually taken, I think, was on the way down. We were getting ready to leave leave Green Bay to go down to Milwaukee Boiler, but I showed up at the roundhouse in the morning, and here was this lineup just sitting out there in 1385, and the Bud car there, the car in the middle was an ex-New Haven, actually, RDC-3, I think. That had converted. Northwestern had purchased it and made it into a track analyzer car. It never really panned out that way. But I know that in my growing up, which I did on the New Haven, that I was on that car, back when in its New Haven days. But then, of course, one of the Alcos in 1983 or 84, I forgot which year it was. The Alcos, you know, from the Alco, everybody knows about the Alco line out there in Huron, but a bunch of those Alcos were transferred to Green Bay. And where they already had the Alcos, you know, the big Alcos that were up on the Ore line, but, you know, they just had the Fairbanks Morse engines there for God knows how long. You know, I guess if you grew up with Fairbanks Morse engines, getting an Alco was like manna from heaven. And so that's that. The next thing was Butler Railroad days. We did that for 3 years, and same deal, multiple trips in a day, with a Lincoln 85 on one end and diesel on the other, and loads of passengers. That was the Butler Chamber of Commerce was the sponsor of that. They told me once how much they made, and that was pretty impressive. That's Gary Selk on the right, and Jim Stever, who was the trainmaster at Butler. I know that Jim was a former conductor working out of Waseca, I think. And Gary was the division traveling engineer on the Wisconsin division. His dad had been a roundhouse foreman on the M and St. L, and Gary kind of hung around, you know, got kind of a taste for steam, and we put him in charge of the coordination with the Mid-Continent and with Milwaukee Boiler and all the rest of it. He did most of the running, at least on the Wisconsin division, and if some of the other divisions needed help, like Gary would do that too. I would say he was one of the key people for us in making the program a success. Gary passed away last year also, unfortunately, in Eau Claire. That's Gary again. I don't really remember, you know, where this picture was taken, but this gets back to the families of railroaders. And it was common. You'd be amazed at the number of places we went where people came down to see the engine, and they said, my dad or my grandpa or somebody in my family worked on that engine. And we know darn well, you know, that it probably wasn't the case. The engine spent most of its life up in the Upper Peninsula, and you know, didn't stray very much, if at all, you know, from that. Although supposedly there was a record someplace that was being used in Iowa. I never saw that. But anyhow, and they'd always have a story, you know, about something about how the old man, you know, and for the women, it was always how difficult it was to keep their clothes clean, you know, it came down to duty on a steam engine. But you know, we kind of chuckled at the time about how all the people, you know, who said, you know, somebody in my family worked on the engine. But I think what they meant was, you know, that, you know, if you were an engineman or a mechanical guy on the Northwestern, you knew an RM or an R1, you know, and you had worked on an R1. And my hunch is that that's kind of what they meant, or what the old man meant. What he said, I worked on those engines. But anyhow, it was a neat story, and I like the looks on this woman's face too. A couple of families came and followed us around. They'd show up in the damnedest places where we had the engine on display or a weekend. I called them our groupies, but it was neat. And one of the things I enjoyed the most about the whole thing really was you know, talking to the people that came down to see us. Almost as good as running it. And every year we'd work a display at the Chicago depot into the itinerary, and that generated a lot of attention, press. And after the second year, the original deal was that the Northwestern Mid-Continent would furnish 2 employees to accompany the locomotive on the trip. They would do the firing, we would do the running with our, you know, qualified engine. We thought it was more important to have a qualified person running the engine and somebody who knew how to fire, because you can do more damage to a steam locomotive by firing it properly than you can running it, really. But anyhow, so we would pay the expenses, including lodging, for the Mid-Continent volunteers, and actually Jim Zito came up with the idea that we would donate to the Continent a baggage car and the business car. And the business car would be the lodging, you know, for the volunteers, and the baggage car would be from one end to the other, a little machine shop, a gift shop, and a little Chicago Northwestern display area. So we did that, and they always had the baggage car on display there. They did a lot of business, and during stops like this on the particularly the gift shop. After you went into the depot, you were going to go west again, so you had to take the locomotive out. We turned it on the Y at Kinsey, and then back it into the 40th Street shop area where you had the old coal docks were still there at the time, and cleaner and water it up and all that. And, I like this picture with the coal dock in the background. And then we back her into the depot and get ready to do whatever we're going to do, you know, the next day. So this was during that move. We stopped out here. Bill Rhea, many of you know, was the fireman. I was running, and so we stopped. Bill and I unloaded, and I'm sure Bill has the same picture as I do. But it's a neat picture. I love the semaphores and the whole thing down back there. This was the City of Chicago Sesquicentennial, 150th anniversary of the chartering of the City of Chicago. And Northwestern was the first railroad in Chicago, and we wanted to participate. So we set up a reception of sorts in the depot. Came in under steam like we are here, and we stopped in the depot, and there were speeches, including one by me. At the time, I was Vice President of Investor Relations, and so that's what's going on here. And here's the circus train, and you can see here this was, I think, this is probably the first run where we used it. You can see the baggage behind the F7s. You can see the baggage cars and the biggest business car. When we donated the business car, Big Continent was trying to make arrangements to get Phil Hastings' collection photos donated there. So we named the business car Phil Hastings. You know, thinking that would help, but it didn't. And which I think, in retrospect, is just as well. I wish there had been the Center for Railroad Photography and Art, you know, or the Lake States or somebody in existence back then. It might have been different, kept it local. But Phil and I became good friends mainly because of Big Continent. But this is the first 1985, the first trip of the circus train after it was resuscitated after the, I don't know how many years, under the Schlitz banner. And part of the deal in Milwaukee was they'd unload the circus train down on the lakefront and had locomotive parked over here for display for visits to the cab. There was always a line like this, and more of a line here than there was at the circus, actually, sometimes. Which I don't know how that went over with the circus people, but and it was another opportunity with the track space was kind of at a premium there, but they had the gift shop set up in the baggage car also. Did a land office business there. Just to show you the sacrifice I made. You know who that guy is? The guy with the hat?
Chappie Fox.
Chappie Fox. Chappie was a big rail fan, and he was getting kind of frail. It was hard for him to get around, but he wanted to get up in the cab, and so that's him. Tony Grippo was the engineer there. Tony later on became a road foreman, and Chappie was a neat guy. And so we had to kind of rejigger the makeup of the train, you know, to when we first ran it, when you saw your picture on the bridge, business cars and passengers were on the rear end. Well, that made it difficult. We got the train to Milwaukee. And so we were getting rid of cabooses at the time, and I came up with the idea of donating one of them to the Continent to to be on the rear end of the train. And this was in 1996, so years after I had left the Northwestern, but this was the first time I saw what they did with it. I think it's beautiful. They did a real nice job, and I hope it's still over there someplace. But I like the layout, you know, with the circus car and the caboose. And so here we are in 1997, 1987, I'm sorry, on the way to the Twin Cities. And the plan had been to run excursions up there. The Northwestern Historical Society had their meeting in the Twin Cities at the time, and we were going to go up there for that and then go up to the head of the lake and some other places at the time. But when we got the estimate for the cost of insurance for the for hauling passengers, we had to curtail that part of it. So we had an open house in the engine house in East Minneapolis, Harrison Street instead. But this picture was taken at Fall Creek. We're in the siding for Meet 490. 490 was a daily manifest train from East Minneapolis to Chicago. Later became EMPRA. Another one of my favorite pictures, really. I like the way the headlight shines, you know, through the smoke on the locomotive. This is part of the display at Minneapolis. Part of it was every half hour we would take the engine out and put it on a turntable, spin it on the turntable, and people loved to see that. And that was a big hit. Wally Moeller was the traveling engineer in the Twin Cities at the time, and Wally had hired out in Waseca as an engineer, and he had worked on steam. And he was he was a wonderful guy and a great traveling engineer, but he was sort of neutral, you know, or didn't seem really excited about you know, getting his hands on the 1385. But his wife told Rita, my wife, afterwards, she said, you know, Wally couldn't sleep 2 nights in a row because he couldn't wait. Which I thought was great. Here's my picture from Rock Springs. And here's another one at Laval. I wanted to get at least one picture of with the wigwags, and I like it being in the rain too. I'm kind of a fan of cruddy weather pictures, and that fitted into it. Okay. Here's another picture on the bridge, and the story behind this one is this was after we had decided in 1988 or 1987, you know, that we had to curtail the the public part of the excursion business. But we had agreed with Mid-Continent that we would provide free movement of the locomotive if they wanted to take it offline. And they ran a whole bunch of trips in various places on Wisconsin Calumet and over the years. And this was one of them. And what I like about this picture is, well, you can see the train. The tonnage rating in steam days for an R1 going up Dane Hill was 850 tons. And that was with a locomotive with 200 or 150 pounds or 200, what was it, Paul? What was the original?
200.
200, we were down, took it down to 150, right?
Yep.
Correct.
So anyhow, you know, 850 tons with 200 pounds and whatever that computed to be with 150. So you got, you know, 6 coaches and a business car and a coal car, you know, the baggage car and a car full of water. So you're pushing 700, maybe 800 tons. So I wanted to get this picture of the train on the bridge, but I also wanted to run the engine for a while. So I said, stop in Lodi and we'll change crews. So we did. I was the engineer. Kenny Ristow, who many of you know, Bob's son, was the fireman. And so from a dead stop at the foot of the hill, one of the things I learned was, you know, you don't stop to change crews at the foot of the hill if you can help it. But we did, and we struggled up the hill. Kenny shoveled a lot of coal, and, you know, all I could do was open the throttle and put the Johnson bar down as far as I could and pray for the best. We made it, but not by much. But anyhow, it was a nice picture, good memory. The other thing that took place on the wicket, which was kind of different, was the handle of freight train. I was in my office in Chicago, and I got a call from Warren Tisler, I think it was. And he said, hey, he said, oh, would you mind if we used the 1385 to help pull a freight train from Milwaukee to Janesville, I guess. So I said, well, you know, why not? So I said, when are you going to leave? He said, you know, later this afternoon. So I said, well, don't leave till I get there. And I did. So here they are. Anyhow, they're on the way from, this is taken on the outskirts of Waukesha, someplace or other, and it's another one of my Photoshop jobs, but nevertheless, I like it. This is a painting by Gil Reed. In 1984 was the NMRA, National Model Railroad Association Convention in Milwaukee, and we then arranged an excursion, you know, for them with the 1385. Went from Chicago, from Butler to Kenosha and back, and they had asked Gil to do a painting that they could give to people who attended the convention. And the locomotive sitting on the connecting track here is the 4311. And the 4311 was originally the 1518, which was the very first Jeep 7 that was ever built. And so when we realized that it was time to retire it and what its history was, we had made arrangements to donate it. And we actually offered it to Big Continent, and they said, we're into steam, but we really aren't interested. So we donated it to the Illinois Railway Museum. And so this is before that all took place. Because before we donated it, we took it down to the shops in Chicago and restored the high hood and painted it up in the original, you know, Streamliner 400 livery and all that. It was kind of neat. But we thought it'd be nice to have the locomotive on display, you know, for the guys at the convention. And, you know, which we did. So here's a no good deed goes unpunished story for you. A couple of months later, the editor, I guess, now the publisher of Railroad Magazine, I think it was called Railroad Magazine, I wrote an editorial. And in his editorial, he took the Northwestern to task for having this dirty old Jeep on display, you know, for the convention. Being unaware as he was, you know, that what the history was of the locomotive, why we did it. And I sat down and I wrote a real snarky reply to him. But one of the lessons I learned early on was if you write a snarky reply, put it aside someplace and before you wind up pushing send, and which I did. So I never sent it. But anyhow, that's the story behind that picture. And here's a picture of the two locomotives side by side in the shop at Butler. So, you know, part of so why do you do, you know, why do you like to make your pictures look like paintings? And it was because of my friendship, you know, with Gil. Gil did a lot of paintings for me, and he did a lot of work for the Chicago Northwestern Steam Program too. But through Gil, I got to know Ted Rose. And Ted came up here to Big Continent and did a show, hung his pictures in the depot, and sold them, you know, joint effort, you know, with some of the proceeds going to the museum and some to Ted. And this was one of the pictures that he had for sale. So when I got up there, I looked at what he had, and really I wasn't impressed with anything other than this one here, but it had been sold. So, you know, so be it. Life goes on. So 3 years ago, I was on eBay, and I very seldom go on eBay. And I looked, and I always, one of the categories that I look at is railroad art. And here is this painting for sale on eBay for $2,500, whatever. So I said, well, I can't do that. But it said, or best offer. So I put in an offer of $1,385. And, you know, about 20 minutes later, I got an email saying, congratulations. So, anyhow, it's a neat picture. I wished he'd done the tender differently, because it's, you know, it's supposed to be an active service. But, you know, it's vintage Ted, and he was a neat guy. This is a picture of the two of them. You know, outside the depot at Mid-Continent. And believe it or not, this goes back 10 years or so. Rita and I were out in Santa Fe, which is where his wife lives, his widow, Polly. And we went to visit her. And she said, I got something here that Ted wanted you to have. And it was that tie.
Oh.
And I was actually going to bring it, but I forgot. But anyhow, nice. And this is, some of you may be familiar with this painting here. This was one that I had copies donated to the Northwestern Historical Society. And if you joined the 400 Club, which meant that you had to donate $400, you got a copy signed by the artist, signed and numbered by the artist of that painting. And it was taken actually from a photograph of mine that I took when I got back from one of our trips. But with the doodlebug in the picture, I didn't think that the line de la Rue ever had passenger service, so I don't think it was historically right to put a doodlebug there in that time, so we doctored up the name of the depot, but I love the picture. And sold out. We had 50 of them, I think 30 prints made, and I think they're all sold by now. That's the picture of mine that he used for the painting. That was John Winfield was the artist on that one. Really a good artist. Lives in Fort Worth, Texas, and he didn't even start painting until he was in his 60s. So goes to show you. Yeah. And this is the last picture. So this is on the back of what I guess at the time was probably the Philip R. Hastings business car, and the Mid-Continent guy said they have drumhead made up, and that was it. And that's it. So I don't know what time it is here. Probably too late to.
There comes the white flags.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, the story behind that is, and I was telling Steve about this. This was we got into Mid-Continent. The last day of the Prosperity Special, and I took the flags down, and I still have them.
Still got those pants, Chris?
No, I don't have that tummy either. They look a little bit dirtier now than they were in the 50s. I don't know how that is. But my plan is, if they ever get the 1385 bolted back together again and running, you know, that I'll take those flags up and hopefully we'll stick them on there and you know, and then use them again.
Yep.
I said, when it gets back, it's going to be called an R1-2.
Yeah.
And, so that is literally the end. It is, oh my God, I did pretty good. Just a few minutes after noon. Any questions? It was one of the highlights of my career, as you can imagine. You know, been a lot of train masters, superintendents, you know, whatever over the years, but not too many guys.
It was sure blessed when you got involved there.
Yeah.
You gave us the opportunity to have fun with that engine, and I thank you for that.
Yeah. Well, you know what? You know, you got to admire the guys that made their living on steamboats.
Guy in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, well, you know, I mean, you know, there were a lot of rail fans in Railroad and in the early years, you know, when I was a young guy, I just carried my camera with me on the property. I mean, it was ever a secret that I was a rail fan, but you know, to me, it helped in my career, and But there's a lot of support, a lot of rail fans that you don't know about, and so it all helps, but yeah.
There were a lot of railroad employees that just wouldn't admit to it too.
Oh, yeah, yeah, absolutely. More today.
That it would
Yeah.
affect their jobs.
Yeah.
I went into the Milwaukee shops in '73 and my 35 mil fit in my lunch bucket. So every afternoon I'd go by the car shop and shoot the car's progress of that day, and that western sun was just great. And you had to dodge the cops, because that was a taboo at the time. You know, they didn't want employees taking pictures.
Yeah. Well, you know, you hear that you ran a steam engine by the seat of your pants, and having done it, I understand it. It really, you kind of become a part of it, you know, it's the motion and the sound and all
You
the
could
rest
feel
of it.
something.
You sure, well, you can, or, you know, if you're listening, you know what to listen for, but, yeah. Yeah, you know, I think it's really sad to see I don't want to get into public, what we're into now on the railroad. I think it's a very, very kind of a dangerous time, actually. You got you know, people don't really relate to the railroad lifestyle. They have troubles, you know, retaining people, and we've got the STB considering all kinds of bad things for the railroad industry. And I think it's kind of sad. And you got employees. I mean, we've always had employees who complain. Everybody likes to complain. I was in the Army and I worked for the railroad. You know, so I mean, you know, I was good at complaining. But you know, you don't write letters. You know that you keep your stuff in the family, and if you want to bitch, you bitch to other employees. You might want to bitch to the management or the union. But it's sad, you know, to see all this stuff getting
sad.
publicized. And
It's sad in the idea that the public has been told, don't do this, don't do that, don't do that for so long. You know, it's losing the edge.
yeah.
Well, you know, lines have gone so much to EMS that they take the fun out of operating a locomotive, and they require that you utilize EMS, so it takes a lot of the pride, it takes away the skill. There really is very little satisfaction left.
Yeah, I suspect you're right. You know, and I guess the guys, when we went from steam to diesel, maybe there were guys that felt the same way. But anyhow, we'll see. But you know, those of us that work for the railroad, hopefully, like myself, they were the best years of your life. You're enjoying railroad retirement, as I do. So, any questions? Anything? Yes, sir.
Did you ever have any pushback from management during the years that you were doing this program?
No, not really. No. There were people who didn't think it was a good idea, thought it was a waste of time, but, you know, not many. And, I remember we had a staff meeting, you know, in Milwaukee one year, and one of the questions, and Zito was there. And it was, you know, at a time when we're scrimping and saving and, you know, not spending money where we really need to spend it, how can you justify, you know, running around with a steam locomotive? And he said, well, you know, it's one of our stakeholders, you know, our shareholders and customers and the public, and you've got to keep your image up, and this is a cheap way to do it. So, you know, glad that way. All right, I guess time to go to beans.